This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at numberFire.com, and this is episode 361 of the Late Round Podcast, one of many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. If you remember this show last year or the year before that, then you know what's coming. If not, let me explain. Jim Sannes is my colleague at numberFire, and he does a great study on the site each year about quarterbacks who are statistically superior in their respective draft classes. So I bring Jim on the show each year to talk about that study and to explain where his head's at with that current year's draft class. And that's what today's show is all about. Before getting to the interview, I wanted to remind you guys to check out racing.fanduel.com. You've heard me talk about it over the last 2 weeks, but horse racing is still going on while the sports world is on hold. So go to racing.fanduel.com, place some bets, and have a little fun while the NBA, MLB, and NHL are suspended. Now let's talk quarterbacks with my man, Jim Sannes. All right, Jim, we do this show every year, and every year I reference your which quarterbacks are statistically superior in this year's draft class article. That's on numberFire.com. But for anyone who hasn't listened to this quarterback show in the past, can you explain your process for that particular study?
Yeah, it's basically looking back at what successful first-round quarterbacks have looked like in the past and looking at just data, not looking at, evaluations and stuff like that, just looking at the data behind them. And when you look at first-round quarterbacks, statistics do seem to matter quite a bit for those top-end picks because if you look at successful first-round picks, they tend to have better profiles statistically coming out than the less successful guys. If we look at just quarterbacks who have gone the first round since 2000, and they have had a top 10 season in net expected points in 1/3 of their qualified seasons, their average adjusted yards per attempt their final year in college was 9.4, whereas the other first rounders, the guys who have not been in the top 10 for a third of their seasons, were at 8.6. That's a pretty big gap. And there's also a big split between quarterbacks who have at least one top 15 season and those who have none. It's 9.1 for the guys with one top 15 season and 8.1 for the guys who didn't. You'd actually be pretty surprised how many first round quarterbacks have never had a top 15 season in net expected points. And looking at the stats, they do seem to matter quite a bit. So players with better adjusted yards per attempt numbers in college are more likely to be successful first-round picks when they come out. Experience also does matter a pretty good amount, specifically once you account for age. And not shockingly here, the best bucket for a player to be in is young and experienced guys like Lamar Jackson was like that, Matthew Stafford. If you are both young and experienced coming out, your odds of being successful are pretty high. If you're older, that's okay, as long as you have a lot of experience. And the older and inexperienced quarterbacks are the guys that don't work out all that often. So ideally what you want from a first-round pick at quarterback is someone who is young, efficient, and experienced. You want to check those three boxes, and obviously you can't always get that. There is nobody in this class who really actually checks all three boxes, but you can still find some really good players. But if you were crafting the ideal quarterback, you would want them to be young, efficient, and experienced coming out of college.
Well, that brings me then to my next question, because the number one quarterback in that study was not the consensus number one pick in this year's draft, which is Joe Burrow. You've got Tua there instead. So can you explain why and whether you actually have Tua ahead of Burrow?
Yeah, I think that if you gave me both these guys healthy, I'd pick Tua. Obviously, that's not the situation we're currently in. So I understand why Joe Burrow is going to go ahead of Tua, and I would not push back against that. I totally get it. But if Tua were healthy, I would go Tua because he's 2 years younger. He's coming off his age 21 season. Burrow's coming off his age 23 season. And like I said, older, inexperienced quarterbacks is kind of the worst case scenario from a draft evaluation perspective. That does not scare me off of Joe Burrow. We'll talk more about him in a second, but it does push me towards Tua because Tua was elite at Alabama. If you look at his AYA in 2018, he was second in the nation behind just Kyler Murray, and he would have led the nation this year had he qualified in 2019. I think my favorite Tua stat, though, and one that stands out, is looking at what he did on 3rd and 6 or longer, because that's an obvious passing situation, kind of puts a quarterback in a bind. You can see what they're working with there. And Tua, on third or sixth or longer this year had an AYA of 17.8, which is just absolutely disgusting. If you look at his full career, get a larger sample, I get that. It's still 15.8. And if you look at this year, none of the other top 7 quarterbacks in this class had an AYA longer or better than 10.8 in that department. So Tua was an outlier in the most positive sense. He was silly. He was stupid. You can talk about the pass catchers. Obviously, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Jerry Jeudy are going to do a lot of good things for you. That doesn't explain a 17.8 AYA on third and six or longer. So if Tua were healthy, I would take him over Burrow, and I feel pretty confident saying that. But given the health situation with Tua, given the fact that teams can't really do medical rechecks right now, I understand why Burrow's going higher. I don't think that's a mistake, but if they were both healthy, I'd take Tua.
So is there any fear then about Burrow as a prospect, given that he was really only good in college for one season, and then as you already noted, he's already 23 years old?
Yeah, that is a concern, because if you look at guys coming off older seasons with not a lot of experience, they don't turn out very well. There have been 15 first-round quarterbacks who came out after their age 22 season or later with less than 35 games under their belt. And Burrow, just 28 games with at least 10 pass attempts, age 23 season, so a year older and less experienced than those two benchmarks. If you look at those 15 first-round quarterbacks in that bucket, they have combined for just one top 10 season in net expected points. Wow. And that was Carson Wentz when he almost won the MVP. So it was a really good year, but 1 out of 65 qualified seasons of at least 200 dropbacks is not great. They've been in the top 15, just 18% of those 65 seasons. That group includes Mitchell Trubisky, Mark Sanchez, Brandon Weeden, who was a hair over 22, Joey Harrington, Christian Ponder, EJ Manuel, a lot of big end busts. But the thing about this is, and the reason why I still think Burrow is good, is that none of them had efficiency anywhere near Burrow's. Mm-hmm. He is one of only two guys in that group had an AYA of 10 or higher in their final collegiate season. Burrow was at 12.5, so he cleared that by a wide margin. He also did that despite playing 1/3 of his games, 5 out of 15, against top 7 defenses in the country, based on Bill Connolly's SP+. So I am on board with Burrow. I think that if I were to lay out one concern, and it would be my only concern, it is the age and the experience, but his efficiency was so good, I am at least partially willing to overlook that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So who are your statistical comps then for Tua and Burrow? Yeah,
statistically, Tua is a lot like Cam Newton, which is weird because Cam's like 90 pounds heavier than Tua and like 15 inches taller, exaggerating a little bit. But when they were coming out, both Tua and Cam were young. They weren't super experienced, but they were efficient. And I think that matters a lot. So I'd comp Tua to Cam statistically. If we're talking like playing style, I think he has a lot of overlap with Baker Mayfield because they're both really smart guys. They're accurate. They can work the ball deep despite maybe not having like a cannon necessarily for an arm. So stats-wise, Cam, play style, I go Baker. As for Joe Burrow, his best statistical comp is Sam Bradford. And that could be viewed as a negative, but I don't think it really is because Bradford had a ton of injuries in college. Those carried over to the NFL too, so it's hard to tell what the career trajectory for Sam Bradford would have looked like had he been healthy. So I don't think that's a negative comp for Sam Bradford. If we're talking play style, I think he's a lot like Russell Wilson. Wilson is faster. He had, I think, a 4.55 40 at the combine. Burrow didn't run, but I don't think he would run 4.55. But the thing they both do well is they excel creating plays outside of structure. Like, if you watch Joe Burrow, he's almost better when things break down, which is wild. So I think that, like, if you give me a bad offensive line and, like, not great wide receivers, I would feel more confident with Joe Burrow than I would anybody else. And I think that is a really good mark for him. So Russell Wilson would be my comp there for Joe Burrow.
So it seems like a big decision in this year's draft is going to be what the Chargers do at number 6. They seem to be strongly tied to Justin Herbert. There have been some rumors that Herbert could even go higher than where the Chargers are drafting. But is he your number 3 quarterback in this class? And then are there any red flags to his profile?
Yeah, he is my number 3, but I think he's a full tier below Tua and Burrow, and I think it's a pretty significant drop-off. So if I were the Chargers or the Dolphins sitting there at 5 and 6, and I had the choice to do so, I would try to do what I could to ensure I get Tua instead of Herbert. And I know trading up historically for quarterbacks has not worked out well. You've done studies on that, and I value draft picks a lot, so it's risky, but I still think I would try to do so given the fall off from the top 2 down to Herbert. But Herbert's still fine. He just doesn't really wow you, I guess, is the way that I'd phrase it. He is young and experienced, which is really good. He's 21 years old. He's got 41 games of experience, and that's good. That's awesome. He was kind of just okay in the efficiency department, and that's not a terrible issue, because if you look at younger, experienced quarterbacks with decent efficiency marks in college, they tend to work out really well. Guys in that bucket of young, experienced, and kind of just okay efficiency are Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson.
Pretty good.
You do have Blake Bortles and Paxton Lynch in there too, so it's not all superstars, but I do think that it is good for Justin Herbert's outlook. The reason that I hesitate is that he ran this super horizontal offense in Oregon. I think it's partly because the pass catchers there weren't very good and there were a lot of drops at Oregon, but he didn't really take the next step from an efficiency perspective. So he's fine. And if you can't get Tua and you're the Chargers there at 6, I would be okay taking Herbert at 6, but I would be trying to get Tua if I could.
Yeah, so who's your comp then for Herbert?
So statistically in the piece, it was Paxton Lynch, which is super unfortunate because nobody wants to be comped to Paxton Lynch. But I do think that sells him short because, again, he would just happen to be closest to Lynch, but a lot of guys in that bucket wound up being good. If I were doing this from a play style perspective, I would call Justin Herbert a more efficient Josh Allen, because Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming he was young, decently experienced, he was athletic, and he had a big arm. And those are really good boxes to check. He just sucked in college, and Herbert didn't suck. He was kind of okay. So if you force me to pick between Josh Allen in 2018 and Justin Herbert now, I would happily take Justin Herbert over Josh Allen, but I think that they check a lot of the same boxes, just that Herbert wasn't as bad statistically in college as Josh Allen was.
Gotcha. So your article showed the top 6 quarterbacks in this year's class, but one player from that list that I saw was missing was Jalen Hurts. So what's missing from his profile, and do you think that he deserves more or less love than he's currently getting?
Yeah, the reason he wasn't on there is because draft stock matters a lot, and it seems unlikely that Jalen Hurts goes in the first round. If you look at all quarterbacks coming out since 2000, there have been only 9 quarterbacks who have entered the NFL as a non-first-round pick and recorded multiple seasons in the top 10 in net expected points. That is 9 out of however many non-first-round quarterbacks there have been since 2000. You do have Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. Those guys are all awesome, but not many guys make it if the NFL doesn't have a big grade on them. So I make the cutoff guys with a grade of 75 or higher on Scouts Inc., and it was those 6 who made that cutoff. So that's a big negative with him, because we can probably assume Hurts will not go in the first round, and your stats in college don't matter if the NFL does not buy in, because NFL evaluators, despite our grievances with them, are pretty good at what they do. But I did do a separate piece on Hurts, and there were some pros and cons here. The pros are that his stats are really good, obviously. He didn't face a super tough schedule, but it was actually tougher than Justin Herbert's, tougher than Jordan Love's, tougher than Jacob Eason's, and we don't really talk about that with them. And when Hurts did face top 50 defenses, he still had a 9.5 AYA. That was much better than everybody except for Burrow and Tua. So he's athletic. That's clearly valuable in the NFL. That's all good. The downsides with Hurts are that he holds on to the ball forever. His average time to throw, according to Pro Football Focus, was 3.08 seconds, and Joe Burrow was the only other guy near the top of this class higher than 2.6. And again, Hurts was at 3.08. And Burrow was still a third of a second quicker than Hurts. So he's going to take a lot of sacks. That's a pretty big negative. But we're talking about guys like Jordan Love and Jacob Eason potentially going in the first round. I view them as bigger negatives than I do Hurts. So I see no reason why Hurts shouldn't be viewed pretty highly. So I think that if I'm looking at things relative to consensus, I'm higher on Hurts than consensus, because if it doesn't work out, he could be a supersized version of Taysom Hill and be a lot better at what Taysom Hill does and what Taysom Hill does. But I think there's a chance he winds up being much more than that. So I think I'm higher on Hurts than consensus, but I understand some of the concerns around him too.
So of the quarterbacks that we haven't talked about today, which one do you think has a chance to make some sort of impact at the NFL level?
I still like Jake Fromm. I know, like, if you watch the combine, you probably think that's really stupid. And, like, I questioned a lot of things because, like, it looked bad. But we talk all the time about our arm strength, and that matters. But if you look at his numbers in college, his average depth of target was 10.3 yards. That was second best among the top guys in this class, behind Jalen Hurts, which is noteworthy for Hurts too, because I think the perception there is that Oklahoma runs this like screen-heavy offense. They did not this year. But 10.3 yards ADOT for Jake Fromm is 1.5 yards higher than Herbert. And he also had the highest percentage of throws traveling at least 20 yards downfield, according to Pro Football Focus. It's among the top 7 guys in this class. So he did go deep, and he was accurate as both a freshman and a sophomore. His AYA was 9.6 as a freshman, 10.1 as a sophomore. He also checks the same boxes as Herbert, where he's young and experienced. Age 21 season, 41 games played, and you look at the numbers this year, they're pretty underwhelming, but he faced this ridiculous schedule where 78% of his pass attempts came against top 50 defenses by Bill Connolly's SP+. Nobody else in this class had more than 61%. So if I'm ranking out this class, I think it's Burrow and Tua easily up top. I think that Justin Herbert deserves to be third there, but I think that, like, Jake Fromm is fourth for me. I understand why people want to go with guys like Love and Eason because they do have a lot of arm talent, and, like, that does matter. Upside is significant, but if you're giving me the choice of Jordan Love in the first round or Jake Fromm in the second, I'm going to take Jake Fromm every time. I know the concerns, and they are legit, but he's smart. He has like this pinpoint accuracy. He has been successful despite the lack of arm talent in the past, and I think that I wouldn't be shocked if he were to be another one of those non-first round success stories a couple years down the line.
Awesome stuff, Jim. Thanks for hopping on. I really appreciate it. For any of you who are not following Jim on Twitter, you should change that immediately and hit him up at Jim Sonis. I'm also on Twitter at LateRoundQB, and if you have questions for Friday's mailbag episode, you can send them there or email me at jj@numberFire.com. Thanks, guys. I'll have a rewind episode for you on Wednesday, so I'll talk to you then.